The story of this sample library goes back to the 1940s in Trinidad, where teenage kids from the poor neighborhoods created the steel band. This photo of the Oval Boys steel band tells its own story. They're beating rhythm on paint cans with wooden sticks. The bass was one note on a big drum with a hole in it. There are no notes on the pans, but they were calling them pans already. That's Ellie Mannette. 3 years later, Ellie is now the pan tuner and leader of the band. There are 4 types of pans here. The background pans are still primitive, 1 note on the bass, 2-note doo-doop, but the ping pong has 12 notes and can play melody and harmony. Ellie was the first person to tune the notes of a scale on the top of an oil barrel, and for the next 70 years, he was the preeminent tuner in the world, always pushing forward, trying to perfect the sound of the pans. When I started playing, we had pans from the 1950s. Yeah, that's me. Ellie came to live in New York in 1967 and everything changed. I've been playing his instruments ever since. The pans of today are far removed from their ancestors, and steel orchestras are thriving all over the world. I didn't know what I was getting into when I decided to create a pan sample library, but we're finally here. From the beginning of this project, I knew I wanted to sample the Ellie Mannette pans that I've been playing on my steel orchestra albums, where I overdubbed 20 or more of them to get the big steel band sound. The pans are in Paris, West Virginia, and California. I played all the pans and engineered, and I tried to capture the full dynamic range of each instrument. I recorded every note in the orchestra at 35 to 40 different volumes. Once everything was loaded into Contact Player, I balanced the pans, 1 sample at a time. Then I started putting together sections of pans, and I began to see the real potential of this instrument. I could create new textures by combining the pans in different ways, or I could play the whole orchestra at once. I'll show you how it works. Here's the main screen. First, let's take a look at the instruments. There are 5 ranges of steel pans in the library: bass, tenor bass, triple guitar, double second, and tenor pans. Each type of pan is grouped with its own kind and has a stereo channel on the console. You have a fader, a pan pot, and a reverb send. The mute and solo buttons are connected to the photos of the pans, so you get a visual read on what you're hearing. The tab above the fader tells you exactly which pans you're hearing and gives you access to all the pans. I'll come back to that in a minute. Let's look at a preset first. The first one is called Full Band 19 because there are 19 instruments in the patch: 4 bass, 2 tenor bass, 4 triple guitars, 4 double seconds, and 5 tenors. It's a full steel band. Listen to each section separately so you get to know the sound of the pans. Changing the balance is an efficient way to get a different sound that you might be looking for. The other way is right here. Touch. I found that the sweetest sounding samples of the pans are at lower MIDI velocities than my keyboards were putting out, so we put this control here, which adjusts the MIDI velocity of each note by whatever value you choose, keeping the dynamics of what you played. You can click on presets or fine-tune it with the knob. The range is -50 to +20. Remember that this is not the same as a volume control. You're actually playing the pans softer or louder, and since the pans have such different harmonic content depending on how hard you hit them, this is more like a tone control. Then you can adjust the volume once you have the tone you want. Let's say you want to play a melody or solo part. First try one of the presets with melody in the name. To look at other possibilities, let's solo the double seconds and click on the DS tab. You can choose from 6 individual instruments or 4 combinations of those pans, each one with a different stereo image. Now try adding some tenors. Choose instruments, play with balances, and that's how you build your own sounds from the individual pans and combinations that are here. Each tab will access a different section of the orchestra. There are 4 different bass pans with 3 combis, 2 tenor bass and a stereo pair, 4 triple guitars and 4 combis, 6 double seconds and 4 combis, and 5 tenors with 3 combis. There's also an old tenor pan here that I'll show you later. When the Solo Selected Group button is on, whichever tab is selected will go into solo mode. If it's off, you'll hear everything in context while you're making changes in this window. The range of each instrument is here at the bottom. Here are the full ranges of the instruments. Bass, tenor bass, triple guitar, double seconds, tenor. If I click on Show Effects, each channel has delay, chorus, and reverb sends. The reverb send here mirrors the one on the main console. There's a high-pass filter. I've made default settings that are on all the time. You can raise those frequencies to remove more lows and make the pans sound brighter. There's a 1-band parametric EQ on each channel. I have a little bit on the guitars in all my presets. Here are the effects returns. You can turn off the reverb if you want to use your DAW for that. My default presets all have reverb on, so I can send from the high pans and not the low ones. The delay and chorus returns are here, as well as the settings. Turn the stereo button on if you want to narrow the stereo image of the output bus. You do that by choosing negative values. You can also enlarge it with positive values, but remember that's a digital effect and it sounds like one. The contact compressor sounds pretty good, but there's no metering, so be careful what you do here. These effects are on the output bus and everything is going through them. When you look at my presets, you'll see there are normal and bright versions. There's no EQ involved in this. It all has to do with the overlapping ranges of the instruments. Let me explain how it works. Take a look at the ranges of the instruments. As you can see, there's a lot of overlap in the ranges of the pans. Now let's listen to just tenors, double seconds, and guitars. There's a warm quality to that first octave above middle C that you don't normally hear. And the reason is that the guitars are playing everything in the low octave and doubling everything in the high octave that the tenors and double seconds are playing. I love that sound, but I also wanted the clear sound of a front line of tenors and double seconds without having to mute the guitars. The solution is to cut the high octave of the guitars and let the double seconds and tenors have that range to themselves. The result is a much clearer sound without EQ, and you get the additional range that the guitars add, plus the fullness of the sound in that octave below middle C where you voice your chords. So you can use my bright presets, or you can fine-tune it yourself. The tenor bass is another instrument where I make cuts. Here it goes no higher than the bass pans to make room for the guitars. Rolling is the way we sustain on steel pans, and it's a complicated thing to model since the actual technique involves so many variables of dynamics and speed. With the sample library, there are two ways to do it, either by hand on the keyboard or by using our rolls function. You have controls for speed, the delay before it kicks in, and a smoothing effect that helps make it sound natural. There's an on-off button, an assignable key switch, and a button to make the sustain pedal activate the rolls. The harmony button is like a harmonizer, but instead of processing the audio, it's transposing the MIDI, so you're actually playing the pans at whatever interval you've chosen. There's a volume control so you can balance the harmonized pans relative to the main ones. In our presets, all the pans are routed to the master stereo output, but you can change that and send them to separate outputs by clicking here. Lastly, I sampled a beautiful old tenor pan from the early 60s, and I extended it to cover the range of a single second. This is the pan my father brought home from Trinidad in 1963, and I still use it on recordings and gigs. So there you have it, the Ellie Mannette Collection, 21 of the most beautiful steel pans in the world. It was a 5-year project to create this instrument. Now I look forward to hearing what you do with it.